morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. It is our honor to have with us our 2nd Congressional District Congressman Chris Stewart for the entire half hour to talk about things that are important to his district, the state of Utah, and his Washington perspective on county issues. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Such a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
It's always an honor to have you here. It just seems like we don't get you here often enough.
It's not often enough, no doubt.
There are a few things that I've made notes of that I'd like to talk about. Public lands has been probably one of our most visited topics on the county seat. We've had 13 episodes in the past 52 weeks talking about that issue. And every now and then, flag comes up. And this is an initiative that you're very much involved in. And as I talk to people about the Federal Lands Action Group, sometimes they get it mixed up with PLI and transfer of public lands at a state level.
Yeah.
Would you take a few minutes and talk to us about flag?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and thanks for the question, and thanks again for allowing me to come speak with you. You know, my district, Utah's 2nd Congressional District, 78% controlled by the federal government. 88% of it is public lands, you know, federal, state, maybe county. This is a huge deal to my district and to the people who live in my district. And basically it comes down to this. I would ask this question. Well, why is it that we have federal bureaucrats who are living in Washington, D.C., working in cubicles in a bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., who have never been to Utah, probably never will be in Utah, and yet they're making decisions that have enormous impact on you and on I and upon families that live throughout Utah and throughout my district. And my argument is we should be making those decisions. The reason we live in Utah is because we love Utah. I mean, both of us have the freedom to live anywhere we want in this country, but we love Utah and we want to protect these lands. We want to protect them for our children, and yet the presumption is that we're not smart enough to do that, or we're not well enough intentioned to do that, and people in Washington have to make those decisions for us, and I just think that's nuts, frankly. I just think it's insane to think that the people in Utah who live here and love it wouldn't make good decisions. And that's, I think, the basic element of FLAG, the Federal Land Action Group, which is this, asking that question, how can we control, those of us who live here, how can the state control more of these federal lands? And look, that's a conversation that many people have had. It's a conversation that's been going on for a long time, but we're trying to lay the legislative foundation to answer those questions and to actually look at a process of how do we return much of the control of these federal lands, again, over to the states.
In the Utah and state-generated transfer of public lands initiative, and some of the surrounding states have taken this up with American Lands Council, they are talking about using either legislative or legal actions as a concept to transfer title of federal lands back to the states. And Utah's gotten further than anybody else.
Yeah.
Is FLAG talking about title of lands or just management of lands?
To be determined, and what we're looking at is both. And if one is impossible, it may be very difficult to actually have a transfer of title. Now, I support the state's lawsuit. I think they should do that, and I hope they're successful in that. But if they're not, we want to continue with this federal legislative answer as well. And, you know, we actually brought in, as we should on these hearings, brought in witnesses who have a varying opinion on that. Some of them say, you know, a transfer of title may be ideal for the states, but it's probably politically impossible. I would actually be satisfied if the state controlled that land. I don't care who owns the title as long as we can control it. That's the primary concern to me. And if that's politically feasible, I'd be very happy with that outcome. But again, we don't know yet, and we'll see. We'll see how the hearings and what conclusions we may come to in that.
You obviously have had conversations about this around Washington. How do some of your eastern colleagues respond? Do they look at you like you're a crazy man when you say that?
Yeah, for sure. And see, this is the challenge that we have, Chad, and I think you'll appreciate this. You know, we're not talking about, well, the Republicans are on one side of this and the Democrats are on the other. We've actually got a lot of our own Republican colleagues who really don't understand this. You know, Republicans from, you know, New York, for example, from the upper eastern coast, even from the south. Texas has virtually or almost virtually no public lands. And when I tell them, you know, as I just told you, 78% of my district is federal lands. I've got a couple counties that are above 90%. They think I'm kidding. I mean, they really do. They well, how much is it really? And I'm saying, no, honestly. And so we've got a lot of educating to do, even among our Republican colleagues. But once they understand this, and once we begin to help them appreciate that, then they're very sympathetic to this idea about why is it that we don't get to control our own backyard? And it's easier to convert them. Not so much true with our Democratic colleagues. They're, of course, almost united in their opposition to this idea.
We're going to take a quick break here on the county seat. We'll be right back with our conversation with Congressman Chris Stewart, and we'll see you right after this commercial break.
Tucked away just outside of Cedar City, Utah, are two of southern Utah's best-kept secrets, Canaraville Falls and Kolob Canyons. The rare scenic views create beautiful backdrops to capture the perfect selfie. Get your selfie to Canaraville Falls or Kolob Canyons and get in on one of Utah's best-kept secrets. Go to visitcedarcity.com and access your adventure.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
Let's be honest, you don't know much about Beaver County. Well, let me tell you about it. It's the birthplace of outlaw Butch Cassidy and inventor Philo T. Farnsworth. Some of the best skiing in Utah is at Eagle Point. You've got camping, Canyon Breeze Golf Course, Crusher and the Tushers, Beaver Territorial Courthouse, snowmobiling, renewable energy, Pioneer Car Show, Squeaky Cheese, Ghost Towns to explore, best water in the country, Paiute ATV trails, Old Frisco Kilns, horse races, hunting, fishing, and it's a good place to live. Beaver County, mountains of fun. I could tell you more, but why don't you come and see it for yourself?
When you buy Utah made and grown.
I'm a Utah's own vegetable grower. I care about the foods I produce.
Because when it comes to quality local foods, I understand the importance of Utah grown and raised.
The jobs that we enjoy are vital because Utah's own supports our communities. As a consumer, I look for Utah's own products because Utah's own is good for me and it's good for Utah.
Keeping it here at home, Utah's own.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today with our congressman from the 2nd District of Utah, Chris Stewart. And we left talking about flag. I want to come back and turn our attention to the waters of the U.S. We have recently done shows on this. The Farm Bureau is very concerned about it. Most of our rural counties are very concerned about it. The governor's office is concerned about it. How are we doing at making a change in this power grab?
Yeah, and concern's not a strong enough word. I mean, frankly, we should be terrified of the federal government taking this kind of power into themselves, claiming navigable waterways that clearly are not, claiming power and regulatory authority that the Clean Water Act, or in another case, the Clean Air Act, had no intention that they would have. But this administration and this president, with their Democratic colleagues, are just determined to move forward on this. We've been working really hard, as you know, with the omnibus and putting in these riders that would preclude, and we did this through the appropriations process, which of course I'm a member of that committee. And I don't know that there's another priority that's higher than the waters of the United States and defunding that, making it impossible for the administration to implement that rule. I mean, this is an interesting fact. It's impossible to know how much this will cost. We know it will be billions of dollars, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars, but no one knows because no one really understands how deeply it's going to be. It's going to penetrate into nearly every county, and not knowing what it costs, not knowing what the outcome will be, and yet the president once again is so defensive of this position, and he's been completely unwilling to work with us. I hope that we can defund this effort through the appropriations process, but it comes down to this omnibus and whether the president and the Democrats will work with us at all. It's one of the most frightening legislative proposals that I think we've seen in our lifetime.
And I talk to people on the Wasatch Front, and their eyes kind of glaze over on this. They don't really get how much. I mean, literally from the rain gutter forward, it almost on your house. it almost gives them control that far, does it not?
Oh, for sure. And I grew up ranching and farming, and those ranches and the farm are still in my family. And my brothers who are farming recognize this could have a real impact on them. It could touch nearly everyone. And there's this saying that says if you've got a pool of water in your backyard, you would fall under the regulatory authority of this act. And I don't know if that's true, but it's nearly true, and it might be more true than we think. So this is something I think, again, when it comes to regulating the EPA, pulling back the regulatory authority of the federal government, I just don't know of a higher priority than this one is.
I think a close one, though, would be national security. I mean, 6 months ago, people in Salt Lake or people in Ogden or in St. George, they would have looked at national security and say, this is a threat to somebody else, not us here. But events of the last 6 months, the last few weeks, have really changed that paradigm. And you're engaged in national security.
Yeah.
So what's your take on it as far as what the impacts are into local communities that aren't New York, Chicago, and Washington?
Well, the reality is those of us living here in Utah, and especially in rural Utah, think, well, national security and the terrorist threat, that's something they have to worry about in Washington or New York. But we have to worry about it everywhere. There's no one, I don't think, who could say that it couldn't possibly impact me, because the reality is that it could. And because I sit on the House Intelligence Committee, and because my previous background is an Air Force pilot for 14 years, this is something that I spend a lot of my time with, and it's something really where I can have an influence and help to preserve the security and the freedom of our nation. But I tell you, we've got a huge challenge ahead of us, as we've been shown over the last few weeks. My heavens, if people knew, I think, truly, the number and the depth and the ability of the threat that faces our country, and how hard our law enforcement and our counterterrorism and counterintelligence agencies are working to protect us, and in some cases, things that they've done that fortunately hasn't been in the press, and shouldn't be, because it would hinder our ability to continue to be successful. But some of the operations that they've intercepted and been able to stop, it would just illustrate, I think, in a really powerful way that this is not something you can, living in Paiute County or in Kane County, and say, well, I don't have to worry about that. The reality is every American does, I think.
Is it surmountable? Or
oh yeah, for sure it is. Can we win this war? For sure. And I argue that all the time. I can't tell you the number of times I've been on national press recently saying, is this president, does he understand that we're in a fight, that we're in a war against Islamic terrorism? And the second question is, if he believes that, why hasn't he taken steps in order to win that war? Because I promise you, we could win this war, and we will win this war.
This got to present a real challenge, though, because I know you're a very constitutional guy. And so, the Patriot Act, on one side you say, okay, this is good because it helps us. On the other hand, our own privacy is at stake. Yeah. How do you balance that?
It's a real tough decision. It really is. Now, I supported the reforms in the Patriot Act. And again, as a former Air Force pilot and someone who works in this area, spent a lot of time there, I understand, as I hopefully have expressed, I understand that we have a real challenge ahead of us, that the threat is real. On the other hand, I also want to protect our privacy. And I think that we can't give up those fundamental constitutional rights to privacy that we've all been promised. The reform in the Patriot Act, I thought, was a pretty good compromise. I think, and I'm very comfortable, that we can continue to get the information that we need in order to protect ourselves, while at the same time protecting the privacy of you and I and our children, and the private communications that we think are essential to just America. I mean, Americans don't trust the federal government. America doesn't want the federal government intruding in their lands. They don't want them intruding in a regulatory way. They also don't want them, intruding in their private lives. And I think we had a pretty good balance of that with the reforms in the Patriot Act that we achieved this last spring.
Well, this is going to seem counterintuitive, but I want to shift from the terrorist threat in their national security to RAD.
Yeah.
And I bet you that you've been challenged on, well, if you're so much for national security, why are you trying to?
Yeah, and there's such a difference, and thanks for asking that question once again. The RAD Act essentially says, why do regulatory agencies have SWAT teams? And we draw a very clear distinction between regulatory agencies and law enforcement. Those agencies that fall under the Department of Justice, sheriff's departments, FBI, federal marshals, etc. That's law enforcement. We want them to do whatever they feel is necessary in order to carry out their mission. On the other hand, argue for me why the Department of Education should have a SWAT team. Tell me why the Department of Agriculture should have a SWAT team, or the BLM or the IRS, any one of them. I don't think that they should. We go and try and collect information on this, and we've really been thwarted. We've been told, you know what, on advice of the Department of Justice, we're not going to answer that question. When we ask them, do you have SWAT teams? Where are they? How much do you spend on them? What kind of training do you give these agencies or these SWAT teams? Well, we're not going to tell you, and I just think that's absurd. And so this act forbids them from spending money on this until we have an accounting from GAO. And it once again draws this distinction between law enforcement and regulatory agencies, but there's no reason for these regulatory agencies to have this kind of power.
We'll be right back on the county seat, our conversation with Congressman Chris Stewart from Utah's 2nd Congressional District. We'll take a commercial break and continue with the show. You may want to stay tuned and tell your friends about it. We're only halfway through.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
The Utah Farm Bureau has always been there to fight for the needs of its members, with discount programs on items ranging from vehicles and ATVs to health and wellness. The membership fees aren't big, but the results are. We've been around since 1916, and we're not leaving anytime soon. Utah Farm Bureau. We work for those who work to feed the world.
Color, it's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're talking today with Congressman Chris Stewart. I left on the verge of asking a question, and this has to do with the RAD Act. There was a rumor, and it was widely spread, that FEMA was buying a ridiculous amount of ammunition a couple of years ago.
We investigated that, and so far as we could determine, it wasn't true. But that doesn't excuse and that doesn't diminish my concern over what we were talking about. And let me give you some quick illustrations, if I could, as we were talking about. Department of Education with a SWAT team sweeping into some individual's home, throw their kids out into a police van while they interrogate their father over what they thought was education, financial education fraud. A family farm in Pennsylvania that's raided with a SWAT team, not just some sheriff knocking on the door, this entire SWAT team, because they were selling unpasteurized milk. Same thing for a woman in California who had a little piece of coral that she'd picked up on a beach somewhere, did not know that it was endangered. Look, one of the real challenges we have before us is there's a great deal of mistrust between the federal government and just you and I, just common people. And this doesn't help. When they see these types of examples, this kind of heavy-handedness, that leads to greater distrust. And again, there's just no reason for them to have this type of heavy firepower.
Just for a clerical or clarification for our viewing audience, what does the RAD Act stand for? I know it's an acronym.
Yeah, of course it's an acronym. Everything in Washington is an acronym, right? Regulatory Agency Demilitarization Act. demilitarizing the regulatory agencies. I ask anyone, for heaven's sakes, Republican or Democrat, tell me why the IRS should have a SWAT team. That's something I think that most of us can agree on.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm already afraid of them enough as it is. Let's talk about some of your legislative initiatives right now. What are you working on the people in your district will be interested in?
Well, and particularly in this audience, I mean, we spend so much of our time on rural issues, on issues that will affect people in the counties that I'm so honored to represent. So, for example, sage grouse. We haven't had a chance to talk about that, and again trying to preclude the federal government from listing the sage grouse as an endangered species, or now the challenge we have is to work with them on their resource management plans, which are nearly the same thing as listing. These resource management plans are so restrictive. So we have a legislation that deals with that. You know, one that affects a lot of people in the southern or central part of the district, or the state actually, are the wild horse and burros that are just decimating the range down there. And these herds are so unhealthy because they're so big and they're just way more than the landscape can obviously keep healthy. So we've got a piece of legislation that says let the states manage those herds. States manage elk, they manage turkey, they manage deer. Why not let us manage the wild horses and keep healthy herds?
The problem is people don't know whether to treat them as livestock or game.
Yeah.
I mean they're not really game, but are wildlife.
Well, that's right.
And they don't have any predators, I suppose, is the biggest problem.
Well, they don't. And these are if you love horses like I do, and I grew up again on a ranch and around animals, you go out and see these herds, and it's very clear that they're not healthy. And that as I said, the environment just can't sustain the number of them. They're starving. They're unhealthy. We want to help these animals. We want to have them be a much healthier herd, but we've got to have state control that. You know, a lot of these initiatives, again, deal with these issues that particularly impacted by people in the rural counties. One more real quick I'll mention, and that is grazing and protecting the ranchers in Utah from the heavy-handed government who have taken away, in many cases, their ability to graze and to maintain family ranches. Because
I hear from the Farm Bureau reduction of AUMs is 65% in Utah overall.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Now that's over a number of years, but I can't tell you the number of times we've met with ranchers, and these aren't big corporate farms, these are truly family ranches, and all they want to do is to be able to keep the ranch so that their son or their daughter can ranch as well with their family. And they'll bring us in this piece of paper they got from the BLM saying, you know, they cut their grazing allotment in half with no explanation. And that's a terrifying thing to a family when they realize that, because they're so dependent on that ability to graze during the summer. So we spent a lot of time with that, and we've got legislation that would address that as well.
Excellent. Well, we're going to take another quick break here on the county seat. When we come back, we'll finish up with Congressman Stewart. We'll get his final thoughts on things, and we'll carry on from there. We'll be right back in just a second.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Shopping in Davis County has never been better. Experience Station Park, Northern Utah's premier gathering place for shopping, dining, and entertainment. With over 100 shops, Station Park is something for the whole family. Or explore the shopping possibilities this season under one roof at the Layton Hills Mall. Both are conveniently located north of downtown Salt Lake, just off I-15. Come take advantage of special discounts and a wide selection of stores. Visit playindavis.com for more info.
The weekends just never feel like they're long enough. By the time you get to a destination, you're worn out and you may need a vacation to recover from your last vacation. The solution is closer than you think, and that's just what you need. You can find the desert at Little Sahara, the cool refreshment of Yuba Lake, escape to the green of the forest on the Nebo Loop. Make your escape to Juab County. It'll change your family forever.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We're talking today with Congressman Stewart. We've got about 3 minutes left in the program. Congressman, I would like to ask you, you've got a lot of initiatives that we've talked about, a lot of things you're monitoring. How hard is it to actually take an initiative and turn it into a bill that gets through the entire system?
Well, it's very difficult actually right now. We can get it through the House, and we're working on 10 or 11 or 12 pieces of legislation that I've written, and we'll be able to get many of those through the House. The challenge we have right now is the Senate and Harry Reid's ability, even in the minority, to stop legislation, but then finally it's the president. I mean, is the president going to work with us on any of these issues? It's hard for me to believe that he will. And I come back to the state again and again. I have this thing where people, I kind of joke, I say, every weekend I come home and people tell me, you're a bad congressman, you got to do this and you got to do this, and why aren't you doing this? And that's just from my family. I mean, that's before I even go talk to people. And no one is more frustrated than I am, and I really mean that. I mean, from the time I get up in the morning, I'm dealing in this environment that I am just so frustrated. And I come home and I talk to constituents and I see their frustration. I see the anger, in some cases they're nearly despair. It's like nothing's ever going to change. And I got to tell you, I don't believe that, Chad. I truly don't believe that. I still think we're the greatest nation on earth. I think we've got a future. We have a huge challenge ahead of us. I'm excited for the next election to kind of take a fresh start. I pray we make a good decision at this election. But gosh, my job would be so much more fun if we had partners in the Senate and then someone in the White House that we trusted who would work with us on some of these things. And I'm really, really looking forward to that day.
Do you think there's a way we can get to a point where we're actually looking at finding good solutions and get away from drawing a line in the sand and dividing it by party? Because that just seems to be the perception here.
Well, it is, and in many cases it is true. And a lot of times I'm feeling like I'm just sticking fingers in the dike and bidding my time, and I'm out of fingers. But there are examples of, though, where we have worked in a bipartisan way in the last few months, especially with Speaker Ryan being there now. That's really brought a bit of fresh air. Transportation bill and a couple others where there was bipartisan support for some legislation, and I think that sets a model for some bipartisan work in the future as well.
Well, I know you're very hardworking, and you must keep a horrendous schedule, because I know how hard it is for us to get a chance to talk to you.
Yeah.
Where do you go to next?
You know what, we've got constituent meetings, and then, there's always a campaign to run, and I'd like to spend a little time with my family before I leave in the morning as well. So.
Wow, you'd have a day in front of you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for the County Seat. We appreciate that you invite us into your homes every week. We ask you to share this with a friend. It is on our Facebook page. It is also on our YouTube page, and you can go to our website, thecountyseat.tv. Remember, local government is where your life is most effective. Be involved, be part of the solution, and we'll see you next week on the County Seat. If you like this video, then we invite you to subscribe to our channel, The County Seat. You can do that here. And we invite you to share with your friends. We also invite you to get all the latest up-to-date information by following us on our social media channels. And if all else fails, make sure that you watch The County Seat Sunday morning at 8:30 right here on ABC4.